Am I live? Am I ready to go? We
We're
good?
live. We're ready.
All right, cool. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are having a wonderful, I believe it's Thursday. And welcome to Black Mammalogist Week 2024. My name is Tyus Williams. I'm a PhD candidate here at UC Berkeley. I will be your moderator for today to keep things smooth and streamlined. And hope you all have an enjoyable time for all the presentations that we're going to be giving out today. We have Aalayna Green, we have Anwar, we have Chelsea Connor. We have some incredible people to share some exciting elements of science communication and some of the fascinating storytelling and work that they do in their respective fields. We're going to open up with allowing each of our presenters to introduce themselves, and then we're going to allow them to start slowly presenting their slides. I think we're starting off with Aalayna first. And so, Aalayna, welcome to the media panel, and thank you so much for taking the time to present with us. And I will allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Tyus. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Black Mammalogist Week. My name is Aalayna Green. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in Natural Resources and the Environment and Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies at Cornell University. My work focuses on the conservation-induced social inequality and environmental justice, and how we can have more just and care-oriented solutions to conservation policy and practice. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Aalayna. I appreciate you taking the time. We're super excited to have you. We're going to have Chelsea pop in now and introduce herself really quickly.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Connor. I'm from the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Caribbean, and I promise it's not the same country as Dominican Republic. I am in my final semester as a master's student in San Francisco. Fingers crossed to finish writing my thesis in time. And I'm working on the phylogeography of Caribbean reptiles. So just looking, building phylogenetic trees and looking to see when they moved in to the different islands in the Caribbean. Really excited to be here. Science communication is like one of my passions. So excited to meet everybody in chat.
Thank you so much for taking the time to develop your presentation, Chelsea, and major congratulations on getting towards your final semester. I know we'll all see you towards the finish line. We're super excited. Let me know when you're presenting so we can all see you and show up for you. And we're going to have Anwar show up and present and introduce himself as well. Anwar, lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Anwar Abdul-Qawi. I'm a zoologist, wildlife photographer, and manager of programs at the Academy of Sciences, Drexel University. A lot of what my work focuses on at the Academy is managing our two living exhibits, our live animal center and our outside-in exhibits, two spaces that incorporate living collections for education. And then my other part of my career is traveling the world and photographing wildlife. So I don't just do mammals. I photograph birds, reptiles, basically anything that catches my eyes, but mammals have been one of my favorite things, and just showing the world the beauty of nature and photography.
We're all a little bit biased here for Black Mammalogist Week as we all focus on mammals. So you're saying the right words and we're starting off strong here. I have a background in wildlife photography, so I'm really excited to see some of your photos that you're going to be also probably sharing with us today. So thank you for taking the time, Anwar, and we're looking forward to seeing what you have to show for us as well.
Thank you.
I think we're going to get ready to start presenting the slides, and we're really excited to see what people have to share about their stories, the methods, and the media that they use to explain their work, whether it's through scientific disciplines or whether it's through creative storytelling or whether it's using wildlife photography to give us a glimpse of the fascinating world that we live in, that we share with the wildlife species around us, especially with the focus on charismatic species like mammals. And so I believe we're going to start with Anwar. And allowing to share some of the slides and some of the work that he does. And Anwar, if you're comfortable and you're ready, we'll take it away. And we're happy to have you share with us some of the work that you do and your science communication practices.
Let's do it. Can you see my screen?
Yep, it looks great.
Perfect. So I like to start off with my favorite prompt of what do you want to be when you grow up? This question has basically defined my entire existence. When I was a kid, I always knew what I wanted to do with my passion when I was younger. I always knew that I wanted to be in the animal field. I knew that I wanted to be a zoologist. And I remember my first high school interview with my neighborhood school. I'm based in Philadelphia, a neighborhood school. And my interview question was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was the principal, it was all of his assistants. And they asked that question, and I was very confident. I said, I want to be a zoologist. And my parents were there. They were happy. They were smiling. And the principal and his assistants all laughed. And I kind of just sat there. I had no idea what was so funny. And the principal looked at me and he said, zoology, that's a really hard field to get into. It takes a lot of years in practice, but you have a nice pair of long legs, play basketball for us instead. So that was super soul crushing to hear that at that young age. My parents were always supportive, but I didn't know that the world wasn't going to be as supportive of my vision and dream. And it kind of crushed my spirit a little bit, and I wasn't as confident. Then I found another school to go to, and the same exact question came up, and I wasn't as confident this time. The principal said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "No, zoologist." I wasn't as excited about it. And his first response was, "That's amazing. How can we support you, and how can your dream support us in the world?" And fast forward years later, and I'm doing it now. So as mentioned before, like, I'm a zoologist, I'm a wildlife photographer, I'm a manager in programs at the academy. I'm doing all the things that basically I was told I couldn't do at that young age. And I've always had a passion for zoology and wildlife photography. A lot of my background starts off in the education field. I started off in 2011 up to current now, working in that education field. But it didn't really come into place, my photography life, until the pandemic. My journey kind of started off with collecting dead birds. So really fast on my way to work, I would find plenty of dead birds that unfortunately passed away due to window collisions. And I would collect them and give them to our ornithology department for education and research, to teach about migration, to teach about how we can protect migratory species and also birds that don't migrate from the dangers of windows. When COVID hit, unfortunately, I couldn't do that anymore, but I wasn't really aware of the vast biodiversity that was in the city. I grew up in Philly, and I didn't think that there was so much living in the city. And I said, well, I want to change my life. I got a bike. I started exploring local green spaces in Philadelphia, and I got a cheap teeny little camera. And fast forward now, and it's my dream. Like, I'm doing it. I'm traveling the world. So the dead birds definitely were a huge eye opener for me, as crazy as that sounds. So here's a bit of some of my attire and outfits that you'll probably will see me in, depending on my location. I've traveled around quite a bit, and we'll kind of talk about certain places, but typically you can kind of find me. I really like the aspect of at the job at the academy. I do a lot of teaching the younger audiences about mammals, about these creatures. And it's really amazing to be able to travel to certain places and seeing these animals actually living and going to the places where they are, and to really exist where they kind of live, figure out how can we appropriately and ethically photograph these animals without disturbing their environment, without impacting them, and how can I come back without leaving with as minimal footprints as possible. And depending on the situation, depending on the animal, definitely does require for different types of attire. So you may see me like wearing a basic shirt. In the middle, I'm all cameled up because I have to kind of blend in, and for camouflage to kind of hide from certain animals. And we'll go through each one, and we'll go through each location in a bit. But yeah, just traveling the world has just been my dream. So I am based in Philadelphia. If you haven't already, I would say I'm pretty biased, but I would say that the best places to see some really cool animals here, some really cool mammals, would be John Hines Wildlife Refuge. So I have 2020 at the current, because that is when I first discovered John Hines. I've been in Philly my entire life, and I had no idea this beautiful green space was right here in Philadelphia. And the first time I went there, I cried, because I didn't know places like this even existed, in Philly. And that's kind of how I started this is my training ground. Even to this day, I will go there with new camera gear and just practice on so many animals, because it is just, I know it like the back of my hand. And some of my favorite specimens that I have photographed, are like squirrels, rabbits, muskrats, chipmunks. And what's really cool is that my goal with photography is to really shine light on species that people probably have already seen so many times throughout their day. People have seen squirrels, people have seen rabbits, maybe not muskrats or chipmunks to that degree, but people usually see squirrels a lot. And what I like to do with my photography, I like to really shine light on these animals and really put them in a different aspects. People can sit there and be like, wow, I see squirrels every single day, but they look so cool. I wasn't really aware how much detail, how much, their fur or their eyes or their ears, whatever it may be, it really puts these animals in a different light. And it kind of takes people who are kind of casual, who aren't nerds like us, who enjoy doing this stuff. It kind of makes the casual person very interested in this world, and hopefully encourages them to want to protect these animals even more. So my big excursion was in 2023. The Academy sent me to Bioko, Equatorial Guinea, Central Africa, for research. And this is basically what my life was like for almost half a month, just on an island, beautiful rainforest, open water. And I remember the first time I got there, I was like just so emotional because I was like, this kid from Philadelphia is in Africa. And it was just mind blowing just being out there, meeting new people, new cultures, and overall just the wildlife. I was like a kid in the candy store. My guide that was with me basically told me to calm down, relax. Like, I know as soon as you get over there, you'll be overly stimulated because there's way too much happening. Because every animal that I saw, I wanted to photograph. If it was a cat, I wanted to photograph. If it was a dog, I wanted to photograph. I didn't care what it was. I just was happy to be there and just get to work. And here are some of my favorite shots from that trip and seeing animals that I've never dreamed of ever seeing. Starting off with the pangolin, probably one of my favorite shots of all time. And a really powerful image because, unfortunately, these are probably one of the most trafficked or killed animals. People they're heavy in what I'm looking for, like the food trade. And unfortunately, these animals are killed or their scales are also used for different things as well. So kind of a super sore subject, but really powerful image because we actually found this animal by accident. It was on the side of the highway. And one of the issues is that certain highways that are there are not made with the environment in mind. So these animals would try to cross the road at night or early morning and they'll get stuck. They can't go anywhere. And unfortunately, they just sit there. And if you're a poacher, they can just wake up early morning, kind of come by, pick them up, and then just, do what they want to do with them. So really sad, but such a powerful image and definitely one that sticks with me. Bats, I had no idea how massive fruit bats were out there. They're really cool. What kind of shocked me about that is that, like I said, I'm in Philly. We have small bats here. People we're so used to just having these giant bats just flying around them. And I was like, guys, like, does no one you guys not see these bats? We're at a college campus. This is where the shot was taken. And a lot of students were just kind of walking around. They're like, oh, yeah, they fly around every day. And when I showed them these pictures, they were like, wait a minute, that's the same bat that fly. I'm like, yeah, that's the same bat that flies around your campus every single day. So it's one of those things where they may see this animal all the time, but the way the way I kind of capture these images, they kind of really puts it into a new perspective. And on the final slide, I'm not sure the exact name of this monkey. I forgot the name. But probably one of the most difficult shots that I ever had to photograph. I was told to wake up super early morning, do a hike through the woods. And I'm used to hiking in Philly, but I didn't know that hiking in Africa in certain places was totally different. And I was tripping around, making a lot of noise. And my guide, he woke up, he was walking around with hot chocolate. He was just casually just walking around. And I'm this kid from the city, and I was struggling. And by the time we found these amazing animals, I was just already exhausted. And for the first time, I wanted to take a break from photography. But once again, it was just a really powerful moment being able to capture these amazing animals that people may see every single day, but they don't really, fully appreciate it, seeing them up close and personal. 2023, I had the experience of being able to go to Abruzzo, Italy. A bit of a different experience. This was a bit on my own. And a totally different environment and totally different purpose because I was there to photograph the beautiful red deer. It was red deer mating season. And with this, as you kind of see in the picture in the middle, it was a totally different experience. Whereas the trip in Africa was a lot more focused on me kind of just walking around and discovering things. This was more of sitting and waiting and being really patient type trip and excursion. So fully camo, can't move, can't talk. And I would say maybe from, let's say, 3 o'clock, I'm sitting in a bush in camouflage and probably not moving until maybe like 7 or 8 o'clock at night and waiting for something to hopefully walk by. And luckily, something did walk by. So probably some of my favorite moments from that experience was capturing the beautiful red deer and one of my favorite animals as well, the red fox. And just being able to sit, have maybe not everyone may be interested or a big fan of these things, but I kind of love being in the world of these animals to the point where you don't move. You're basically a bush. And when you're a bush, you can't talk. You're not making noise. You're not on your phone. You're just sitting there to the point where you have ants and stuff kind of crawling in your suit. Like, it was very uncomfortable. You're wet because it's raining. And these images don't ever really convey that storytelling. It doesn't really ever show that the story behind the shot. But capturing these powerful moments that took so many hours for the animals that were just there for maybe like 5 minutes, it's just something that always sticks with me. And then lastly, I recently just got back from Slovenia in 2024 it was a bear excursion. So a bit of a different experience, where I'm kind of stationed in a little hut. Once again, there's no talking, there's no eating, there's nothing. And I was there for the beautiful bears that they have there. And I remember when I finally got these shots of these bears, of the mom and her cubs, I actually cried because it kind of all hit me at once. I'm like, once again, this kid from Philly is out in the middle of the woods and it just was photographing these amazing animals and just capturing moments that people may not ever get to experience because, you know, we tend to make a lot of noise. We're really loud. We do a lot of stuff. We have scents and smells. And animals are really smart. They can kind of catch on to these things, especially mammals. They have great sense of smell, great sense of hearing. So it's all about learning how to photograph these animals in a way that's not invasive, that's not disrupting them. And once you're kind of sitting back, once you're quiet, and these shots were all taken, it probably takes maybe like 7-8 hours to get these shots. You can kind of sit there and watch these animals in their natural behavior, and it's just a beautiful moment to witness. And plenty of hedgehogs and plenty of squirrels as well. But yeah, that's basically my journey. Once again, it's just like I just love the idea of being able to be out in the world photographing these amazing animals. So, yeah.
Wow. I first off mean mind-blowing quality of photos. I just want to say, like, I thought I was a decent photographer, and then I saw your photos. I was like, I was like, I need to step my game up. I've been out of practice for such a long time. I was like, oh yeah, you know, it's like we're kind of dabbling. I was like just tossing out of the wind. I was like, it's incredible. Amazing quality of photos. Your story is so relatable, I think, for so many people that reverence, you know, of being able to like really connect with nature. And I, as somebody I did my senior thesis on jaguars, like I remember for the first time going international and like stepping out of a car and, you know, we're in the rainforest and it's sprinkling and the canopies connecting. And I step out and I see the fresh paw print in the mud of a jaguar. And I was like, I literally feel like I'm in Jurassic Park. There's something so primordial about being in the middle of a jungle and tropical birds are squawking and flying, and it sends a chill up your body that's so intoxicating that you're like, most people in their entire lives never get to experience what it's like to stand in the midst, in the presence of a fauna or ecosystem or reality that's so ancient, far beyond our own comprehension, longer than we have been on this planet. And so I feel like you conveyed so much of that through your story and not only through your photos. And I commend you as just like another Black person to another Black person, just being able to live out your childhood dreams, because that really touched me when you were just saying, like, I want to be a zoologist. I was the same way as a kid. I knew what I wanted to be when I was 6 years old. So I'm happy to see that other people are doing it too. Anwar, thank you so much for taking the time to share your presentation and your photos. I'd love to talk to you more about photography later on. I don't know if we're opening up for questions for each individual, but I think we're doing that at the end, Joe. But I think we're going to transition to our next presenter.
Thank you so much.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know about you guys, but that was incredible. Chelsea will now be presenting for us. Chelsea, take your time to get ready, and we're ready whenever you are. And we're super excited to hear about what you have to share with us today. And thank you again for taking your time to present with us. You're muted, by the way.
I always do this, always.
You are loud and clear.
There we go. I co-host a podcast and I do that on the podcast too. Forget that I'm muted. All right. Really excited to talk to everybody today. So like we already said, my name is Chelsea Connor. And just some like background. Like I said, I'm from the Commonwealth of Dominica, and this is actually one of my favorite places back home. It's called Freshwater Lake, which is not a very creative name, I'll admit, but it is like up a mountain in cloud forest, and it is our like largest freshwater lake, which is why it's called Freshwater Lake. And it's an incredible place to go. It's one of my favorite spots. It's one of the places that you go on school trips, and it's one of the things that like I always remember, and every time I thought about like what I wanted to be as I like jumped from idea to idea, I kept coming back to like, is there a way that I could like be out there in the forest working on animals, looking at animals? And this is one of the places that I think of. Like I said, it's up in like cloud forest. There's a lot of birds. There's a few endemic species of birds. My island has 2 endemic species of parrot. Seeing the more rare one day at one of the national parks was like eye-opening for me. Is like, oh, I love birds actually. And I guess I talked about loving birds so much. My mother got me, it's out of print now actually, and I'm very careful with it, but there's this guide of birds from my island, and I like every day I'd look through it, I'd learn their names, and that was also my first connection into like figuring out how to look up animals by like a species name, because we speak Lesser Antillean Creole on my island, and there is a bit of that like barrier as I was growing up. What do they call this in like American English? Like what would the name be? How do I look it up? I came to Texas actually for undergrad. And I, at first I thought like, okay, well, since I'm going to do this degree, I am going to probably end up working at a zoo, which is fine. I'll still like work with animals, even though like I know I want to work with them in some other way. And I just don't know exactly what that is. And I met my undergrad advisor and I told him, and he's like, oh, I know your island. I work on the anole lizards on your island. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I'd love to hear about it. He's like, oh, you could do it. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, no, you could do it. You could literally just also study the lizards. And I said, like, well, I don't know if that's something I could do. And he looked at me, just like looked at me like, why not? And from there, like, I've been asking myself that every time there's something new I want to do. I'm like, why not? So that's like the beginning of my academic journey. And currently I'm working on my master's. And I also am an artist. So I do draw and I sculpt and I paint. And I'll show you a bit more of that later. But I'm going to talk about how I approach SciComm. I don't study mammals. I don't have cool mammal pictures for you. I'm so sorry. But just to start off with, I like to like talk about my passions. So I remember Fern Gully from growing up. And that is like one of the things, like as I was like in undergrad, I was like, oh, I should rewatch this movie. And I remember like every line, I remember the animals, and it's like, oh, okay, this is another thing that like stuck with me as I was growing up. And that like passion like pushed me further. And now that I'm in my master's, I rewatched it again. And I did an extensive thread cataloging all of the animals in Fern Gully. The group of people who worked on the movie actually took a trip to Australia, to the rainforest where the movie is based, and based everything off of an actual animal that they saw. And being able to like see that in the animation, being able to like connect with that meant a lot to me. So that is something that like I was like, okay, well, I need people to know. And I wasn't thinking about whether or not people would receive it well. I was thinking about how much fun it was for me to find all this out, and that if anybody else appreciates it, that they would also find it fun. And I think that's a really important connection to make in science communication. It's like, what do you like and what do you want to convey to people? I also try to stick to my knowledge base. I have a large knowledge base because I read papers for fun. But like typically if there's like questions I'm not able to answer, I will like openly say that like I don't know what's going on with this, but like I know lizards very well. Again, sorry to the mammals, but I know lizards very well, so I tend to always like go back to lizards and to birds as well as part of my knowledge base for talking about things. So in the Caribbean, almost every island has an endemic anole. And for a while, I did this hashtag on Twitter where I talked about a different anole every week. And, showing people the diversity of these lizards. There's like 410 recognized species across the Caribbean and Central and South America. Being able to show that to people. And then here I'm at a comic book / anime convention talking about anoles again. And I modeled it after Spider-Verse so that people were able to connect with it. So, I'm taking my passion and my knowledge base and I'm turning it into something that people can connect with and that can reach people on different levels. Also for Valentine's Day, I talked about how lizards find their mates. Next. Another important thing is to like be open to feedback or corrections, but also knowing like when to stand up for yourself. And that was a really important lesson for me to learn. It's like one of the things that I keep in my mind all the time for my science communication. Here I talk about the folklore around some birds on my island. And I got a message about this where someone was like, well, I don't think any of this is true. I don't think it's scientifically accurate for you to say any of that. Like, I appreciate the feedback. Maybe there isn't any scientific background in some folklore, and that's fine. The point of folklore is to like pass on culture and pass on beliefs. And this is my culture and this is my belief. So I had to stand up for myself and, assert that this is what I'm talking about. And here I made this tweet about Pokemon, and it gave me like a good jumping point to talk about what a brood parasite is. And lots of people chimed in to say that like, hey, actually that's not what happened in the episode. I did watch the episode. I know what happened. But, it's a one-off joke, but also like talking about what a brood parasite is. And got to talk about my podcast that I co-host. We talk about the animals that inspire different Pokemon. So there are mammals in there. And my first episode, we talked about anoles because there's some new Pokemon based on anoles. And throughout my journey, I just keep finding new ways to talk about the things that I love and figuring out how to incorporate them into all of the things that I'm already working on or learning new things. Here we did a presentation for a wildflower conservatory and talked about Pokemon based on flowers or that interact with flowers in some way, like pollinators. Coming to the art, depending on the classes that I teach as a TA, I will draw my students different diagrams. This one was when we had to do a fish dissection. So I take the extra time to figure out what is the best way to communicate that to them. How can I tell them or show them with this art that like this is what we're going to be doing. I'm not sure like how it was for you, but for a lot of students doing dissections, just telling them, okay, first we're going to do this cut, or doing it on the table where they can't see you is really difficult. And some of them have a difficult time figuring it out from the pictures because once you cut it open, sometimes everything seems to blend together. Having a clear image like this really helps them and really helps them understand. And then I also do fun art. In herpetology, a lot of people call soft shell turtles pancakes because they're so flat. So just finding fun ways to communicate a nickname or some other type of imagery. These poison dart frogs are referred to as like a strawberry because of how they are, like that shade of red and pink that they have. Drawing maps and highlighting different animals from different locations. This is the Cicero parrot. It's one of the endemic parrots on my island. And then just one day I saw an image of a hermit crab with a shell that was literally a cap from a dishwashing liquid bottle. And I just drew a bunch of other hermit crabs and odd shells. And these are all actual ones that I saw when I Googled it. So just drawing versions of that. This is some of my sculpture. But like, again, for me, science communication is a passion that connects all of my other passions. And that's all I have for you for that presentation for now.
Thank you so much for that was amazing. Chelsea, I always forget how talented you are in like art. And then whenever I see them, I'm always just like, I was like, dang, like that's so good. The soft shell turtle is amazing. And they really are like living pancakes, and especially because
they're incredible.
They're so adorable, and yet they're very like bitey and aggressive, which is understandable. But and your story, one of the things I love about your creative storytelling is that like you're so good at like pulling parallels between things. I noticed this, and for anybody that's watching now, I did watch Chelsea Connor and I did present during the Juneteenth for Nerd Night in SF, and you also shared things about SF, about Ferngully, and I was just so blown away by your ability to like identify every single species in the movie to an actual organism that is present within Dominica. Correct me if I'm wrong. I spent a long time since I've seen Ferngully. Is Ferngully in Dominica or is Ferngully in
It's
an
in
island?
Australia. So
Okay.
yeah, so they call it Mount Warning in the movie because at the time it was known as Mount Warning, but it's been returned to the Aboriginal people in that area, and they've given it back its original name of Mount Wollumbin.
Wonderful. I think Chelsea's
And
cutting
then
a
you see the
ton.
mountain. There's a part where she like flies above the canopy and you can see the mountain in the distance. So I went to iNaturalist and I was like, all right, the mountain's here. I can assume she's this distance away. This is my zone. And then I made a larger buffer zone because animals travel. So I went off of like sightings of different animals and records of different animals. It took me like 3 days and I slept like 2 hours.
I love that. I mean, no, first off, the science application too. You said buffer zones, and I was there with you. You said, all right, you said, let me take the hypotenuse at like flying height, and she must be somewhere right here. And let me take a buffer zone and then take like record observations of like species that are in the area to get an idea of like the wildlife community. It's so brilliant. Your brilliant is just exudes through the way that you speak and the way that you present. And once again, we all look really forward to seeing you present with your master's, your thesis, and obviously seeing like the conclusions that you come to. And also too, we could definitely talk more about the biology of Pokemon because there's just the scientific representation for so many species or animals in there is just so spot on. Sandshrew absolutely is a pangolin. There's no debate. Everybody knows that Sandshrew is a pangolin. And then Pikachu is obviously based off of the American pikas, which is super cool. And so we just love that you tap into all of our childhood nerdism, and we all can really see that very clearly through your energy. So thank you so much for your time today, Chelsea, and thanks for your time. So everybody, I don't know about you, but that was pretty dope. I'm probably going to be reading more into like Pokemon biology afterwards. But we're going to have to bring on our next presenter, Aalayna Green, to close us off and share some of her findings as well. Aalayna, thank you so much for taking the time again to share your background, your story, and like how you came into being a science communicator. And feel free to take it away.
Are you able to see my screen? Is it all good? Oh,
yes.
Yep, it's all good. Amazing. So I usually start my presentations by having like a moment of reflection for everybody. So I ask, what got you here? And I think a lot of times in my experience, and I'm not sure, or I'm sure with other people as well, there's a fine line that I think people assume exists between being your full self or like being merging your personal with your professional. And I think oftentimes the personal can get lost. And so in moments of struggle with my work, I always go back to what got me here and my roots. So my background of building zoos out of gingerbread with my friends at my grandma's house, of caring for a bunch of creatures and spending my summers swimming in the Great Lakes in Michigan, ultimately fostered my love for wildlife. And these experiences I tended to ignore throughout my undergraduate, really early on, because they weren't scientific or they weren't academic enough. But I now see that these experiences have ultimately shaped me into the scientist I am today. And this entails showing up unapologetically to my scholarship and recognizing how my identity impacts the way I practice my science. And so as a child, I was really anxious and introverted, and arguably I still am. So I found a lot of solace in books and animals. And so I started my career at Michigan State University, and I was also trained as a zoologist, but I had full intentions of going to veterinary school, largely because that was the only thing I knew that you could do with animals. But I met my undergrad advisor, Meredith Gore, my sophomore year of undergrad. And at this time, I was saying I was going through a midlife crisis because I was like, maybe I don't want to be a vet anymore, but I don't know what else to do. And Meredith really took a chance on me. And she says I also took a chance on her, largely because she had a job posting for a research position in a lab of conservation criminology. So essentially wildlife crime. And she was looking for someone who was fluent in French and knew ArcGIS, and I didn't know how to do either, but I applied anyway. And I didn't hear anything for a couple weeks, and then I get an email from her, and she says, "I'm so sorry. I was in the rainforest in Madagascar. Can we meet when I get back?" And that really changed the trajectory of my life. And I'm now pursuing my PhD in natural resources. But my experience with Meredith was also my first time being able to travel and being able to see how studying people essentially and their relationships to the environment can take me to really cool places and also be a form of advocacy and also extend my practice as a writer. And so in 2020, right before the pandemic, I presented at Pathways Human Dimensions of Conservation conference in Kenya. And it was also here that I got my first exposure to this other aspect of conservation that I had only really read about, but could never really actualize in my mind. So this is in Nairobi National Park, and this is a photo of an armed guard. And this really set off the type of work that I do now, which is looking at how we can potentially do conservation in a way that doesn't rely on violence or doesn't rely on these types of kind of restrictive or over securitized practices. And I specifically work in Botswana and Namibia, where Botswana utilizes a shoot to kill policy. So if they suspect that an individual is poaching or illegally hunting, they're allowed to shoot to kill. And this obviously ends up in a lot of tension between the two countries. And I look at the ways that we can potentially do something different and how these types of policies, if they're going to be implemented in other places, have this really huge tangible human impact. And going into this work, I found that I was stuck in my head with a lot of this information. I work with an activist group in Namibia. They're called Namibian Lives Matter, and they advocate for similar to Black Lives Matter movement in the US, they advocate for racial justice for marginalized peoples, and particularly in the context of people who have been victimized either by losing a family member or them being injured themselves by the shoot to kill policy in relation to conservation efforts in the area. And with this work and then with other work I do, a lot of it is centered around justice. And I think there are times when I felt that I could be doing more. And being able to like study this is kind of keeping it in a vacuum if I'm not able to get it out to places. And so a lot of the times I resort to writing, and this includes writing in both academic and also non-academic senses. And so I'm not sure how many of you have seen this paper, but I know it's circulated a lot. And this is a response to an article that was advocating for sterilization of marginalized peoples and really fueled this overpopulation narrative. And this was an article that me and a couple other people, including Tyus, co-wrote to be in opposition to these really, really harmful narratives. And this was one of the first articles that I saw that, oh, my writing could actually have an impact. And writing is able to do things in ways that can have a tangible impact in the real world, right? And this is also my first exposure to my writing having a lot of criticism, particularly from Cafaro et al., where I was getting slammed in their blogs. Apparently, I was getting slammed in their classrooms, and it caused a lot of uproar in those circles. But it also showed the power that writing can have and the capabilities of writing to be able to start these really difficult conversations. And so I've kept writing. Recently, I wrote an op-ed about Namibian Lives Matter and the shoot to kill policy and environmental health news. And this is in an area where it's not in an academic sense. And I think there's a lot of power in non-academic writing, and especially in being able to get these really complex and these really difficult topics, right, for academics into a non-academic space and in spaces where there can actually be substantial change, right? And the same goes with a Medium article I wrote. This also had a lot of pushback from people. And I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my writing process and throughout me growing as a scholar and also as a person is just being comfortable with being disliked, and also being true to my own opinions and things like that. And I think that's something that's been really helpful in me being able to have like specific concrete arguments, but also not be dissuade or discouraged from being true to myself. And so currently I am actually writing a book. My book is Ugly Head, Bearing Witness to the Unmasking of Conservation. It'll be coming out hopefully end of next year. But this is something that I felt I needed at a time when I was starting school. And this was something that I've continued to need because I haven't seen it unless I'm writing it. And so some of the tips that I give for like my number one piece of writing advice is to read. And this is something that I did throughout my life, but I especially did during my first year as a PhD student. And that being able to read really helps craft my writing and also gives me reasons to critique. I don't always read things that I agree with, but this is so I can make my arguments better. And essentially write what you want to read. And this largely came up what happened with the book. One of my committee members, he had written a book, Mordecai Ogata. He wrote The Big Conservation Lie. And I sent him an email. I said, hey, can we talk about what your book writing process was? Because one of his biggest pieces of advice when I was going to him and telling him about the things that I was seeing when I was in the field or reading about, or the conversations that I was having with Namibian Lives Matter, he was like, write everything down, like write it down, make mini essays, keep a notebook, everything. And those ultimately turned into a book proposal, and he fully supported me. And that's kind of what led to this book as a piece of the advocacy that I want to share with the world, and also as a sentiment to what I needed when I was starting this journey. And again, remain true to yourself. I remember I was in a fellowship retreat meeting, and the fellowship organizers were saying, oh, like in regards to like Twitter, in regards to their social media platforms, they're like, I really tailor it, or I really censor myself. And I think that's something that you guys should do too. And I was like, I have not that followers matter, but like, I'm like, I have 5,000 followers, and I tweet about Megan Thee Stallion, like shaking ass half the time. And then I'm also talking about science. So I think it's just people like authenticity, and there's no reason to not be your authentic self for the sake of professionalism. Well, within reason. And I think also abandoning perfection and being able to write not well. Like, it's okay to not have like a Toni Morrison, to have something that is so extreme and elaborate the first time that you sit down to write, right? So just be able to be okay with not having the perfect piece, but be able to go back and edit it. And also always be prepared for people to not like what you say. And I think this is something that academics face in regards to like rejection from journal articles and things like that. But I think it gets different when you start having a more public facing platform, is that people are going to be, they're going to be in opposition to you, or they're going to say things or try and target your character depending on what you're writing. You just got to be prepared for that, and also understand that you said what you said, and you got to stick with it. And so I wanted to end this with like a couple, I love reading. And these 4 books have really helped in how I've cultivated my writing practice and how I've found my voice. And I really returned to this quote from Toni Morrison. It was also the main reason why I chose to start writing a book now instead of waiting. And her quote is, if you find a book that you really want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. This is your story, I think, is so multifaceted, which I love about it. And I think it really speaks to a lot of the people about the process of, I think, like really becoming like comfortable with yourself in a world where it's really difficult to navigate like the esoteric nature of science that has often sometimes this weird romanticization around like savantism, or people who are just somehow like inherently like steadfast in everything that they want to do, or just like inherently certain about everything that they want to do. And I think like it's important to recognize the humanity of the reality that like we are all figuring things out as we're going through this process. And then people have different pathways to getting into the science that they're doing too. It's not like the way that I feel like often media or television often depicts like a 14-year-old child that like teaches themselves like calculus, and then they're like, cool, I'm going to become like a faculty member. Like rarely that does happen sometimes, but it's like most cases, people who especially are excluded from scientific fields, like have really interesting and unconventional processes that find themselves in these spaces that I think are far more interesting while still being very talented at the same time. You being a great example of somebody who has, established a space for herself and has gone on the lengths to like write literature and write books for themselves, and something I can really admire. Somebody who has also like written a book as well, not nearly the same way that you have, but but it's really it's compelling, and I think it's really admirable, and I think it's really encouraging for people to see the humility, and I think just like the humanity of what it means to be a scientist and still just be like imperfectly imperfect, which is kind of like the human
Yeah.
experience. And I just wanted to say that I love your story. And also, yeah, I didn't realize also the all the feedback. I heard some of it with all the Carafo response paper. I know that they wrote a counter response to our response. I remember when that happened. But I'm glad that I could help out with some of that. And also just, yeah, major shout out to you for speaking up and just like being an advocate for things that are clearly just like wrong and like unethical. So Aalayna, you are a dime a dozen. You not a dime, excuse me. You are one of a kind in a world where so many people, I think, are comfortable, I think, sometimes with status quo. And I commend you for being unconventional and unapologetic with the way that you are as a scientist in this field where we need more people with your light. So thank you so much for taking your time to share with us of your perspective. And I think we're probably going to go to questions, Q&As. And we have Q&As tuning in, but I don't know where we're at in terms of like time, Joe, but let me know. But one thing I was going to ask you about Aalayna that I thought was really interesting was that I was curious about was for you when you're tackling the underbelly of this was actually really interesting when you were tackling the underbelly of conservation, which I find mind-boggling, the idea that somebody could even lose their life as a process of poaching. I was curious, how do we have a conversation about that in the larger realm of like how imperialism is responsible for a lot of the destabilization that puts people in a position to poach in the first place when you're educating or when you're discussing that with people, when you're advocating for people not losing their lives as a consequence of poaching, because it is kind of absurd to me that that would even happen to somebody in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really good question because I think it's something that I have been grappling with myself. Just because largely it's not even talked about in like academic spaces, let alone in public spaces. And I think it's largely related to this rhetoric behind poachers being automatically bad, and that equating also to Blackness being automatically bad, because a lot of these shoot on sight policies are happening in the African continent, and this is something that has been permissible, largely due to like imperialism and these racist structures. And I think being able to kind of equate or kind of break down like what's actually happening. And one of my colleagues said this quote that I use often is, he says, every time I look in the park, I wonder how many of us had to die for that elephant. And this is something that I tell people. And I'm like, how many lives do you think an elephant is worth? And I think that
Right.
really kind of sets the gravity for a lot of people, because I think it's really easy when we're like, say we're in the United States or we're in Europe or something like that, to say like, oh, okay, like, yeah, we have to shoot poachers. But it's like when you see people have families, people have communities and things like that, what that actually looks like. And I think trying to use my writing and have these conversations in ways that kind of can get that connection is really helpful. And it's something that I've used like with my own family who didn't know this stuff was going on, but having to explain these types of things really simply is just the most that you can do, or the least that you can do, essentially.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I think if possible, it'd be great to pull in some of the other speakers and I can like poll some questions with them to kind of pick their brains for a bit. Thanks again for everybody here for taking the time to share their brilliance and their creativity and all their backgrounds and how they fell into where they are. It just really shows how diverse STEM is as a field and how much more diverse it could be if we allowed for it to have the inclusion that it really needs for more people to matriculate into this field. One question that I wanted to ask you guys is, there's a lack of visibility for people in STEM. It's like, but we also know the harrowing stories of how Black people have been treated by scientific institutions. And one question I wanted to ask is, how do we bridge the gap intergenerational trauma in suspicion so we can contribute more widely to science in transformational ways? And how do you use your methods of science communication and storytelling as a vehicle to bridge that gap? Anwar, I want to start with you because I feel like your photography, I think, is a really good vessel to like open people up to that world.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing question. I think a lot of what I usually get on social media is still people who don't feel as though I'm still they don't view me as a photographer. Like I get a lot of criticism from people. They're like, you're a fake photographer, or I bet your parents bought you that lens, or you're not, So I the best comments I ever receive on social media are from other Black photographers who reach out to me and they're like, bro, I found your account on Instagram or TikTok. And it feels so good seeing someone who looks like me for the first time actually killing it on this platform. And it makes them feel as though that they can also, it almost motivates them to a point to also put themselves out there and show that, wait, we can be outside in this space as well. Like this space isn't just for one person or one race. Like this is a space for everybody, So people have reached out from all over the world, who look like me. And they're like, dude, like your account, your work has inspired me to buy a camera, to go hiking, to really put myself out there and start following my photography dream. Because I think just like me when I started off, they probably also had that vision and dream of wanting to be a photographer or a zoologist or someone in the science field. And it took someone to say, hey, sorry, that field is not for you. You should be, an athlete or a musician, which is totally fine. Like there's nothing wrong with doing those things. But I feel like we can do more. We can do more than that. I think that's always
absolutely.
We can. I think we're always kind of put in those categories. They're fine categories, but like people always limit us to those things, and that's not what your interest is. We should be able to be. We should be allowed to be dreamers. We should be allowed to be able to be conservationists and naturalists and be out in this field. So I think putting yourself out there, showing off your work, people will be like, "Wow, you took that!" Like, wow, it's that's great. That makes sense. So
I love it. It's a great response. Chelsea, Aalayna, do you guys have any thoughts? I have tons of questions to ask if you guys, because I also can personalize questions for you guys too if you want. But I figure you guys might also have a response to that because it's very broad.
Yeah, I definitely have had like a pretty rough time in academia. And something that I think about is where would I be? How much further would I be? Like what changes would I made if like I had the support that I needed? Because like my
I think we lost Chelsea briefly. Aalayna, we'll go to you until she pops back in.
Yeah, that's
Chelsea.
fine.
Chelsea, we lost you a little bit there. Your connection is a little bit spotty.
I don't know what happened. My Wi-Fi is fine.
Can you reiterate your last few thoughts to make sure that you make sure that we hear what you're saying so you're not cut off?
Yeah, no, I've definitely had a rough time in academia, and I feel like now that my undergrad advisor exists in a vacuum, and I think like what we definitely need to like put a focus on making sure that like students are being supported in the way that they need, not just in like, okay, here is the material to like do research, go to these questions, but like how can I take care of like your mental needs? How can I help you, make sure that you're safe? Like if you bring an issue to me, how can it be addressed? Because I feel like one of the main problems I've had is like, hey, someone said something to me that was racist in some way, and everybody going, we don't know how to respond to that. In order to continue like look like us in these fields, you need to be able to respond to questions like that and issues like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, it's a really, really solid point. It's the idea of fostering a community of care that allows people to feel like they can enter these spaces, I think, is fundamental. Aalayna, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's just building community. I've been really fortunate to have a great advisor who's also a Black woman and also has gone through like in the similar field, Shorna Allred at UNC Chapel Hill. And it's been really, really influential to have that kind of support from someone who's also gone through it. And I know that's not the case for everybody, but also being able to cultivate my community of other Black scholars where I'm at, and then my community at home has been like, that's why I'm still here,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love the way that all your thoughts I intersect with the idea of like inspiration, community building, and then like care is kind of like the main 3 points that I feel like I'm seeing with a lot of this, which is like it's funny because the answer itself is so simple and to remedy what would seem to be like this long-term history or disparity that's kind of like affected a lot of people in this country. But it feels like it's easier said than done because that requires a long-term process of also unlearning a lot of biases throughout these generations of how they've been entrenched in this country, which is integral to its construction. Into getting into that as a really good transition, if we don't have any other questions popping from viewers or guests, one thing I did think was really interesting watching all of your presentations is that I think it's really interesting how the conversation around conservation is fundamentally important when we're talking about like global health or biodiversity preservation. But often for some people, it feels like it's kind of like a hobby or kind of a pastime, that's something that people participate in as some form of like recreation. It's like you think of like activists or people who are like nature enthusiasts. And I think what's really important, especially for Black Mammologist Week, is having a conversation on like how environmental justice and conservation intersects and like why Black people should care about conservation fundamentally for the communities that we interact with. And what would you say to people when it comes to those kind of conversations of like, why should you care about this? Like, why does this affect you in terms of environmental health and environmental justice? And like, what does that mean for us as a long term when we're having conversations that are fundamentally important for a community at large?
That's a really good question. Oh my God. I look at it almost just from like a photographer perspective of just being involved in the conversation. I always look at it as like, if you don't really put yourself in these rooms, in these situations to really be a part of these conversations, how can you ever make change? So I use photography as a gateway to talk about conservation in the sense of, how can we inspire the general public through images or through social media? I think social media is such a powerful tool. And I think everyone should be able to hopefully use it to kind of grow their brand, grow themselves, and really put themselves out there. And if you don't really, I guess, put yourselves in these situations so you can kind of be part of these big conversations, you can't really make much of a difference, unfortunately. And I learned that it's also a gateway, because through my photography, I've been able to be in conversations with other conservation organizations or other institutions. So you never know who you'll be able to impact or talk to. So when I meet people who look like me, who want to get into this field, I always say, it can be a hobby, but like, think of it as like your livelihood. Think of it like, you should want to go outside and appreciate nature. Like, we're all connected. You should go out, and it kind of changes your perception of everything. Like I said before the pandemic, even though I was in this field of education and conservation, I kind of just viewed Philadelphia as a city. And after the pandemic, I view everything so like seriously now. Like I really care about the dead birds that are on the sidewalk. I really care about the animals that, when I photograph the same birds that, are in the trees, next thing you know, they're dead on the street. It actually impacts me. It actually kind of hurts now, because I understand that, okay, these birds are migrating, these birds are doing this. Like I know more about the system that I'm living in. So I kind of view it where, I think people should be a lot more connected to their environment. Really fast, something that we did was really cool. We actually I went out to a local neighborhood school, and my job was to teach kids about birding. And it may sound terrifying because, kids are now so into their phones and social media. Educating kids is pretty challenging, but the way I kind of got them interested into it was that, first of all, they saw me and they were like, wait a minute, this Black guy's going to like talk about, he's a photographer, he's this and that. So first of all, they were like, wait a minute, like, who is this person? So that was already like a step one to get them to get in the door. And then, like, as we kind of talked about birds, it kind of made it fun. I was surprised that the first question, I was like, what do you guys know about birds? And they were like, we know nothing. This is boring. This is dumb. And the more I kind of questioned them, they knew stuff. Like they really knew about their environment. They knew like what pigeons were. They knew about, finches and stuff like that. And I was like, see, guys, you guys started off of like acting like you didn't know anything, but you know way more than you guys think. And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about, like making things accessible, making things, giving that support, because kids are smart. They know their environment, but if they're not given that opportunity, if no one's really pushing them, they're not going to ever utilize that skill set. But by the end of it, they were like, birding is fun. I want to do more of this. This is great. And I was like, see, like, come on, like you guys know your stuff. Just you need that extra push to really get yourself out there. So, yeah.
I love the idea of making something more culturally and socially acceptable too, which I think is really important for the question that I was asking there too. The idea that like not being shamed for being really interested in something that might not be like conventionally popular within like Black cultural spaces, and I talk about this a lot. I'm very active on social media about this idea of like it's kind of like the novelty of unconventional Blackness theory. That it's the idea of like the tokenization, not because of the thing that you do, but rather because it's the color of your skin doing the specific thing that you do. So it could be like, oh, like, you know, you are a, you know, whatever. We could say like a taxonomist, or you could say like you do taxidermy, right? Like you're interesting because you're a Black person doing taxidermy, when taxidermy is actually really performed by a lot of people for a lot of different demographics. And it's that weird thing where it's like there's always this novelty around it that makes you special, but that in itself also can sometimes be like a bit of a microaggression because it's like an exception to the rule, you know? It's like, oh, like you're different from everybody else, which is like story of my life growing up as a kid, which is like always the things that I dealt with all the time. And I think like when you make things more culturally acceptable for people, you start making it a more common, broad, you know, general practice for a lot of people that makes it stop being this novelty or weird like romanticization around it, and making it be like, oh yeah, Black people burn, like, you know, it's like everybody burns, like, you know. And I love that. I love the idea of also being like socially acceptable. We are at the hour mark. Joe just told me, he's like, but happy to continue asking questions. I'm happy to continue asking questions if you guys want to continue chatting, but also don't want to hold you at all. But I know I asked that question, Aalayna or Chelsea, if you guys had thoughts on that. Let me know if you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely also happy to keep chatting. Hope my internet doesn't do that weird thing again. But I think like just increasing the visibility of like weeks like this, like Black Mammologist Week, Blackbirders Week, and all the other like focused weeks, to like really solidify for people like, hey, yeah, we're definitely all here, and we've been here for a while. It's just that like for when it comes to seeing the diversity in certain groups, like people have a hard time seeing it. But pushing that to the forefront, I think, is really, really important. And like having people from specific communities like tell stories or reach people in their communities. I like last year I won a scholarship for Highlights magazine, so I went to like a writing workshop, and I met an author from the Caribbean, and like we talked every single day, and he's my mentor now. So I'm like working on a kid's book, and every time we have a conversation about writing, we talk about what's on with the demographic back home. Like we're focused on that demographic, like just reaching people within your community, I think is really important, because like Anwar was saying, like they know stuff and they want to learn more, but like you need to be able to like make that connection into
I love that. Yeah, it's not enough. So like I love the idea. It's kind of like how we say like for us in our community that's like kind of like Black people in like high places doesn't essentially like save us, and it's very true, especially if we don't want to get too into the waters of like politics, but like I think it's really I love the idea of what you were saying there, Chelsea, the idea that's like it's not just the representation itself, it's also the intent that is compassionate and empathetic in caregiving, in wanting to curate like support and give back to people. You could be in a space that there's not a lot of representation in, but do very little if scant, in terms of actually advocating for more, presence or more participation in the field that you're representing. And I think that's really important. I like the idea of being like actually really intentionally thinking about the way that you're creating space for other people, which is critical with the conversation that we're having here and what we're trying to do with this entire event of Black Mammologist Week as well.
Yeah.
Aalayna, do you have any thoughts as well about the idea of like why we should care about conservation and what does that mean in terms of like getting people involved because it intersects with environmental justice?
Yeah, actually I was thinking more along the lines of like, especially I work with a lot of like high school kids and elementary school kids, and undergrads and things like that.
Right.
I think it's also just showing that we're not perfect people, and kind of deviating from the expectation, or like the Blackness expectation. Doesn't have to be perfect. And you're able to change your mind and do things differently, and it's going to work out in one way or another. And I think really emphasizing that gets people excited to join conservation or join environmental science or things like that. And I think a lot of my work is centered around environmental justice and conservation, and the intersection between the two, just because it was something I saw all the time, and something that it didn't really make sense to me why people weren't talking about it and talking about these intersections, because I felt like they were so connected, and a lot of the injustices that we see in the US are being practiced and refined around protected areas and within national parks through their history, and also through what we're seeing today. And I think kind of emphasizing these connections between social justice, between racial justice and conservation are really crucial for creating these futures that Black people want to be a part of and can be a part of in a sustainable way.
Wow, I love that. I feel like when we talk about like intentional like conservation or environmental justice, it's like, I think it's really interesting. There's something really special, I think, about being like a steward for the natural world. And then it's like, I love the idea that it's like we should be a part of the conversation because we're all implicated in the ongoing process and devastation of human caused climate change that's exacerbated by like our carbon footprint. And so to me, it's just like why wouldn't you want to be a stakeholder in the conversation at large of like what it means for your future children or kin, or just, you know, or descendants, the people who are the successors of the generations after us, of not having to go into a book to see what tigers look like, rather than knowing that they could have existed like, you know, 30 years ago before they went like extinct, which is one of my biggest fears, is that like tigers go extinct in my lifetime. And I'm just like, nobody should ever have to like think and ponder about what could have been, when we have the capacity now to prevent that from happening. And that's not just even just the sense of just like marginalized communities, but like at large. And it's like I feel like it here, and my thing is too, it's like we're better, we're stronger together when we're all coming to the table. And to me, I feel like that's what makes it really interesting to me, that it's like, I feel like everybody should be at the table, and a lot of people aren't. And for me, I'm like, why wouldn't you want to have a seat at the table having this conversation, how we're all impacted by whether it's policies or decision making, or whether it's like, you know, legislation that's being passed. And to me, I'm like, I would be really curious about how people are showing up to my local, you know, court system and advocating for the passage of a bill that changes my landscape to some degree. And I'm like, well, I feel like I should be there in that hearing and hearing what's going on, because we're all influenced by it. And I think of it like I try to educate people, and when I communicate, I'm like, don't just think of it about like energetic investments, like, but think about it as a long-term like environmental investment. Like the currency is like health when you think about it, if we're talking about like public health too, which is really interesting, and it's very complex, which is why a lot of people have very different angles coming at it. You know, another question that I had for you guys is, you know, often sometimes, let me come at a different angle. One of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about what's interesting is, how can we, so let me rephrase. People have different relationships with animals. And I think especially when we're talking about a field like mammalogy too, I'm curious is, do you find when it comes to, how do you communicate the work that you do with people who might have negative experiences with wildlife, or when certain animal species, especially like large carnivores, might experience more vilification or might experience more stereotypes or like negative assumptions? And what's interesting is I often find that there's this really interesting parallel between Black people in wildlife that are persecuted, especially like large carnivores, in the way that they're like actually really important to their ecosystems, but often are overlooked for that because they were locally extirpated by settler colonials, et cetera. There's some really interesting parallels that you can pull there. And I think what's really interesting is that like, how do you have conversations with people who are like legitimately like scared or have negative experiences or have negative perspectives in trying to encourage them to be participants in something that should concern them? Whether that's through storytelling or communication styles, what are the methods and media that you use to try to change people's perspectives about things?
That is a phenomenal question, and one that I usually answer almost every day. So basically, the number one thing that I like to do is always see where they're coming from. You never really want to downplay someone's experience. We all have different experiences. I'll take, for example, one of my favorite animals to talk about being the cockroach. People hate roaches. People think that they're disgusting. People have bad experiences with them. They just hate them. That and snakes. Probably one of the most hated animals, and spiders. The list goes on. There's so many animals that people just have a weird stigma or hatred towards, or just their own personal experience. And when people tell me these things, I hear them. I get it. I'm like, I understand. A lot of it comes. A lot of ways you can kind of break that down is your overall education. I know that when you learn more about something, it kind of opens up new perspectives on what the situation is. So when you kind of learn that snakes, number one, don't care about people. Snakes aren't going out of the way to attack or hunt people. Most people who get, unfortunately, a bit by a snake, usually it's a freak accident, or people going out of the way to pick up a snake or mess with it, and then they're harmed. Most roaches live out in nature. Yeah, we have roaches in the city, but most roaches actually live out in nature, and they're super vital for the survival of the ecosystem. So like spiders, most people are afraid of spiders. Spiders, for the most part, can't do that much harm to you. They're actually pretty beneficial. They get rid of mites, they get rid of flies, they get rid of a lot of things. Having them in your house or at certain places in your neighborhood can actually be helpful to get rid of certain species. So once you kind of educate a bit more about why these things do exist, and once again, not downplaying their experience, people don't like it when you say, oh, you're overreacting, or that's stupid, that's silly, why are you afraid of it? Because you're already making them feel bad. You're already kind of shutting them down. You should listen to what they're saying. You should express it. Yeah, this is totally right. I understand where you're coming from. I feel that, but let me explain to you why. And my last point would be almost talking about, I know poaching is a huge thing. I kind of get upset when people talk about, he made this point too, I think Aalayna, about the views on poaching and how people are in Africa. I had a conversation about someone about food, and like people, long story short, people were saying that like, why are people poaching? They shouldn't do that. That's messed up. That's wrong. And I was like, we're privileged. I was like, I live here in Philly. Like, if I want, I can go down the street. I can go to Wawa and get me some food. How can I go to this country? How can I go to a certain village and say, hey guys, maybe you guys shouldn't kill this animal because of X, Y, and Z? And they'll look at me like, well, if I do this, I get money to support my family, medicine, whatever it may be. How can I come from my place of privilege and tell them how to live their life? So I have to understand what their story is. I have to understand that. And I think it's a message that I wish more people kind of talked about, where it's like, yes, there is bad poaching. Yes, but not all poaching is bad. Understand people have different stories. People have different backgrounds. So you got to find that middle ground of like, cool, I understand you're in a situation. What can we do? Can we support you? And maybe we don't have you to be an armed guard anymore. Maybe your role is something else in conservation that we can fund you so you don't have to poach. Maybe you can do something else to get money. Find an alternative. But just to say poaching is bad, we're better, you're bad, that doesn't really solve the problem. And it comes from a place of ignorance and privilege. So, yeah.
Yeah. Chelsea, Aalayna, any thoughts to add on to that?
Do you mind if I add something really quick?
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So in the same way, where I've spoken with families who have been like, they've had family members killed by elephants, or they've had family members killed because of elephants, because of people wanting to see elephants or be in spaces where elephants are able to be protected. And I am never in any position to influence someone to care about something that has destroyed their family or destroyed their livelihood in any way. And so I think one of the bigger things that I encounter with this type of messaging, beyond like the communities that I work with or the government officials that I work with, is getting the public to understand like what poaching is, and getting to people to understand these human elements that come with any type of wildlife that you're working with. I think it's going to be a bold statement, but I think humans are one of the most interesting mammals to study just because of their relationships to the environment. And I know this is a very big topic, or a big statement to say that humans are the best mammal, because arguably they're kind of the worst, but I think they're the most interesting. But I think it's just getting to this point where you have to be able to be flexible with how you get people to care and where that care comes from. Yeah, Chelsea, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so coming from the Caribbean, there's like a lot of things that we have, a lot of like superstitions that we hold, like snakes for one, a big part of superstition in the Caribbean. And I remember like we have an endemic boa. I remember holding an endemic boa when I was a kid, and like my mom was like she's like, no, you can't hold it. It's going to do the XYZ. And like I was gonna tell her, well, no, snakes are really good. They eat like rats, and like just me reminding her about that every time we saw a snake. Like we'd go pick mangoes, and sometimes there'd be like snakes at the like root of the trees. And having that conversation with her every time, like it made her easier around snakes. She doesn't want to touch them, but like, you know, meeting people where they are is like super important. Not judging them for like, you know, their fear or superstitions. I feel like often I'll see people online like make fun of people for having superstitions, but like coming from the island that I come from, like it's just natural to me to hear that someone has a superstition about something. We have like such a rich culture of superstition and folklore, and to dismiss that, it's like you're pushing people away from wanting to listen to you and wanting to know more. And like we had mentioned earlier, people do want to learn more. When I was like doing my data collection for my undergrad research, somebody saw me like catching one of the anoles, and they're like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you know, they were like, but why are you touching the lizard? And I explained to them, and also like hearing my accent, and they're like, oh, you're also from here, and like, what are you working on? Tell me more about it. They still didn't want to touch the lizard, but like just hearing that there's like things going on, there's ways that we can like learn about the environment, looking at certain things with animals and how they interact with each other. That was really interesting to them. And I don't know how much they remember of it, but like they definitely like recoiled less at the idea of the lizard at the end of it. Like being able to meet people where they are is like really important. And like in that same vein, there are some people that will never change their minds. All you can do is your best.
I love that. I love the idea of like recognizing that there's a boundary between like superstitions that are harmful and also like that kind of also protect people in some ways. Like, you know, like it's interesting, it's actually really interesting to think about the idea that like people who have superstitions around certain animals actually could be the thing that deters them from like disturbing them. They're like, oh, we don't touch snakes, we don't interact with them, like we leave them alone, or like or whatever. And it's kind of like, well, that could be the difference between them actually coexisting. And obviously then there's the other side of where like people believe that there's like aphrodisiacs or there's all sorts of other things. And like, well, this thing helps us or it benefits us and it aids us. And it's like, well, this now becomes like a conservation problem. And how do we like utilize education, or how do we utilize scientific research? Or how do we communicate in ways that are approachable and respectful, that allow people to realize that this might not be the best means of profitable gain, and how can we transition it to something more sustainable, right? Rather than just shutting down people's form of income and being like, maybe let's do something different, like, you know? And that's really important, which is actually interesting, because I wanted to transition into another question for you guys that I thought was really important about this conversation, is that like, you know, one of the things that I find about wildlife science, especially as a Black mammologist and as a Black ecologist myself, just somebody who's in the field of science, is that like, you know, for a lot of Black people, the career pursuits that we go into are largely like income dependent. In like accruing large amounts of income, there's a lot of pressure to make a lot of money. Science can be very lucrative in some areas. Natural resources, however, is not one of those fields. It's a growing discipline. Actually, we're actually seeing that through studies, being like it's one of the most important fields now in the next couple of decades, as we're seeing. But for a lot of people, it's not a very strong income-based practice. And when you have a community that suffers a lot from economic disparities or income gaps or wealth gaps on an intergenerational level, And you have people who are looking at this field that benefits from legacy and leisure and a lot of like wealth that is passed down, where people can not make a lot of money and still travel the country because of all the wealth that they've accrued and be able to sit in their chairs and write papers and philosophize however they want. It makes it hard to get out of a like hustle mindset, trying to be respectful when I say that, but there's a lot of hustle culture around this country just from capitalism, in encouraging people to get into a field where you have brilliant people that could be offering cutting edge ideas. And I feel like I wonder, what do you say to people that are like, man, there's not a lot of money in that though. You're like, and it's hard to argue against that. Sometimes I'm just like, like they're not wrong. I'm like, I ain't making no money over here. I'm like, I got papers, but not that kind of paper, I'm like, it's hard. I'm just like, what can we say to future generations where we, especially in late stage capitalism, where we're clearly seeing the more younger people who are realizing the gap that grows bigger between the people who hoard most of the wealth in this country, and getting them into a field that feels like it's a rat race, like, especially even as competitive as academia is too. And even academia is decreasing, like, tenure, like it's becoming more competitive now. So like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what do you say to people where they're like what's the money there? Like, how do you support yourself?
Yeah. So I get that question every single day, and it's something I've been fighting with eternally at one point in my life as well. And I was kind of struggling. I think I would say when I graduated college, it was probably one of the hardest times in my life, because I did land a role at the academy, but it was a starter position, and it's just hard surviving, in general. And I was like, man, all my friends were like in business or finance, and and they were doing great, and I was like, man, like maybe this is maybe this wasn't the best decision, and I had that doubt. It's normal. And it's one of the hardest parts to have working in this field is I see a young kid come up to me and they're like, oh my God, I want to be you when I grow up. And I was like, do you though? Like in the back of my mind, I think that. And it's like, you have to, the number one thing when I meet new interns and new volunteers that come in who are interested in this field, I'm honest. I don't lie. I don't sugarcoat anything. I'm very open about the realism of this field. And I say, if you're in this field for the money, you're in the wrong field. I knew what I was getting myself into from day one, and I knew that I can easily get a job doing something else that makes way more money. But will I be happy? I wake up and I am genuinely happy of the life that I'm living. Teaching people about education, working with live animals, photographing nature. And even when it comes to my camera gear, photography is, as you know, is a super expensive thing to get into. And, people are like, how do you afford this stuff? Or people online are like, I bet your mom bought you that camera. I'm like, no, this is all my hard earned effort and work. I don't, sometimes I'm not buying dinner, or sometimes I'm not, there's sacrifice there, that there's work that builds up to that, because I want it to be, I truly care about what I'm doing. So when I meet someone who's young and in this field, I'm like, look, get into this field because it is important. It is an important field that needs to be talked about. And people like me, who look like me, should be in this field, in these conversations and tables as well. So don't let that deter you, but figure out a strategy. I always say you don't have to go all in. I know people who are photographers who do photography on the side who also work another job that pays the bills. There's no one's journey is just it's black and white. There's alternatives, but just I think being upfront, being honest about the situation, about the pay, about your future, just gets people's minds going. I think college. The last point I'll make. I think college is very pressured in youth. I know that when we were growing up, I'm sure we heard that you have to go to college, you have to do this. If you don't do this, you're not going to be successful. And I meet a lot of kids now who, I guess, are on a different path. I know college is still very important, but there's so many different alternatives. Because college, I think even college in a way is a bit of an accessibility issue. Not all people can afford to even go to college to get these degrees. So when I'm hiring people for my job, I'm not looking and saying, oh, you don't have a degree, trash. But no, like I want to still talk to the person because who knows what their experience could be, who knows what they can bring to the table. So I just think just being upfront, being honest. If you have an interest in this field, try as hard as you can, but still try to do other things that can support your dream. I'm not doing photography full time yet. It is my dream. I'm doing something that's aiding it, So hopefully one day I can do this full time, So take steps for building your future. That makes sense.
I love that.
All
And
right.
Chelsea, do you have thoughts? Absolutely. Jump in.
One of the reasons why I started an online store is because, like, things are so expensive and you don't make a lot of money in this field. But like I take breaks from it every now and then, because at the core of it, I love doing art. I love doing those funny drawings. I love like making parallels between animals and food, or like different jokes. And like something gets lost when you're like, oh, I need to just make another sticker so that people will buy it. So you really just need to be in this field, if this is a field that you really want to be in. Like Anwar was saying, like, this is what you love and this is what you want to do for passion. There's not a whole lot of money in it, unless you want to become like the CEO of a museum or something. But like when you get to that point, you don't get to work with the animals as much anymore. You get to see them when you walk by to like meeting to meeting. You need to decide like what is it you want to do. But I do also think that there should be more support systems in place for people who want to be in this field. We shouldn't just have to like find alternative forms of income, or work 3 jobs, or turn all into something marketable. We should be able to like have support and be able to complete our degrees, and go to the forests and experience what cloud forest is like for the first time as we're doing research.
I love that. It's there's something to really be said about the idea of like, I think it's really important that you should really love what you do. And my mom always said growing up to me, just like, do what you love and like the money will come. And it's hard to maintain that, like sustain that, where rent goes up and inflation is getting harder, like in groceries get more expensive. But there is something to be said, though, I will say, about the fact that like people love to invest in talent. Like, people see it and they see genuine passion and talent, and they want to support people. And that's the interesting thing about there is like my dad's, and I'm very privileged. I mean, like, I grew up in a pretty common, like, upper middle class, like, lifestyle. And I could do the things that I wanted to do, and my parents would just like support me, and they'd be like, my parents would like, do what you want to do, like, and I did those things. But one thing I would think that was interesting that my parents would tell me too is that like people want to invest in people who are passionate and good at the things that they do. And I found that to be really true, especially as someone who has established a bit of presence online or in social media as a science communicator. I do find, as things have grown for me, more people reach out to me. They're like, I'd love to have you do this thing, or I'd love to offer you this thing, or I'm now having like a reoccurring guest lecture for like the Young Voices of Science, and they give me a very generous like stipend. And it's like, I didn't really ask for anything. I didn't expect it to happen the way they wanted to give me those things and invite me back again and again, which really shows that like, I think the most important thing, and I really agree with Anwar, what you were saying, and you too, Chelsea, but the idea of like the most important thing too is like really hone that craft. Like you like really invest your time in building that skill set, because that's what sets you apart from other people. Because unfortunately we do live in a competitive market and still got to pay the bills at the end of the day. But like people can see the difference between somebody who's trying to gun for like a quick dollar. Not that that's inherently a bad thing, but somebody who's like, this is somebody who's been spending like a decade of their life doing this thing, and they care deeply about it. And they're like, and that's somebody that I want to get behind. And next thing you know, you're sponsored, which is, by the way, insane. I did not realize you were buying all your gear. Anwar, you should definitely be sponsored by like Sony.
We're getting there.
I'm literally tweeting. I'm tweeting right now. I'm moderating. You just figured out he's not like, somebody get this man a sponsorship.
It's all me, So
we gotta fix that.
I have like binoculars sent to me. Like, you should have camera gear sent to me.
It's like you said, it's a highly competitive field, but we're working on it.
But we saw your pictures, so I feel like you're at the top there.
Thank
you. This has been such an exciting time in talking to you all about the things that you guys do. And one thing that I was wondering, because we were talking about like work, and like we're talking about like how these fields can be lucrative more than others, or like how to make it in a field. And what's interesting is that, like, I wonder for you, like, this is a really exciting time for like technology, but also there's a lot of saturation with the internet and all of these things, whether it's TikTok or Threads or like Instagram. And one of the things I was going to ask you is, like, what emerging trends or technologies in like conservation or mammalogy like excite you the most, and how do you think they'll shape the future of the field? But then also too, like, do you find in some ways that like the kind of omnipresence of the internet makes it actually a little bit difficult to filter through things? And so I guess my question is like, how have you found navigating this massive internet platform in this modern age both difficult and beneficial to you in the times of you establishing yourself in your career? And like, what about it do you like, and what about it do you really dislike?
So one thing that I specialize in is definitely of like technology and growing yourself on social media. Like I remember before the pandemic, my goal was always to hit 10K. I don't know why. I always want to hit 10K on Instagram. That's my goal, whatever. And I remember I grinded, I posted, I blew up, and I hit 10K. I was like, cool, this is great. I was so happy. Then it kept going with the 20, 30, 40, 50. Now we're sitting at 176. And I'm not saying that to brag. It's more so just that, like, when I hit these things, the novelty and the excitement kind of just wasn't really there. I was like, I put so much thought into, like, my goal was hitting this thing, and I hit it. And I was like, it wasn't really that important. That makes sense to me, if it makes sense. So like I hit these things. I'm not saying that follower accounts and stuff aren't important, but I think when you kind of focus on what do you truly care about and why you're doing things on social media, it kind of makes working through social media a lot easier. Because I believe that social media is actually an amazing tool. It's a blessing and a curse. I always say I graduated from YouTube University because people think I have a degree in photography. I do not. Everything that I learned about photography was from YouTube, from articles. I self-taught. It's a resource. Back in the day, you would have to go to school, or back in the day, you would have to go to these certain classes to be able to do these things. But now people have access to these things for the most part. You just Google, hey, how do I take a picture? Or what cheap lens can I buy? Or what's the best? There's so much information there. And being able to market and sell yourself. And then she's not here anymore. She talked about being true to yourself. One thing I always talk about is how to really, people love connecting themselves to an individual online. I, of course, show my pictures and stuff, but two things I'm also passionate about is anime and fitness. So, and I'm not really shy about that kind of stuff. It's a running joke that, like, I don't wear shirts or stuff like that, but it's
the thirst trapping king. I was just like, oh, he's got it. I saw your followers and I saw Instagram, and I was just like, I see what's going on here. I was like, and I'm not hating for you. I was like, get it, brother. I was like, you got the body, use it,
strategy. It's just like, I'm already hitting the people who care about nature, who care about stuff. Like, how can I bring in new audiences to care about other stuff? So like, I look at it as a way of advertising. So I always say that the social media is a powerful tool if you know how to use it. Of course, there is a dark side to it. When I first started, I would always read the comments, which is like, never do that because there's so much hate and negativity. And as humans, we're so interesting. We're like programmed that we stick on to negative things for some reason. There could be like 1,000 comments of like, great job, great photo, this is amazing. And then one comment goes, dude, this picture sucks, or you're trash. And for some reason, that one comment just sticks with you and it ruins your entire mindset.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just weird because it's like, we have support. We have people here who want to boost their career. Why are we so fixated on negativity and hate? And I even there's a lot of female photographers that I talk to who get it even worse than me, because the fact that, they're in a field that's mainly a male-dominated sport, photography. So a lot of people feel intimidated seeing that there are females who are out doing their thing, but they'll get super weird comments about, oh, you shouldn't wear that outfit, or you're just a girl, so they're getting, the fact that they're a girl and all, they're getting so much other types of hate and negativity online. So I always say, really balance out your time on social media, really disconnect, don't take things too seriously. People, I understand. I learn that people who hate or say these negative things often have nothing going on for themselves. People like to sit and make rude comments or just hate, or really they feel intimidated, they feel upset, and they're just jealous overall. They see someone who's making it probably someone of color as well. They're like, man, I wish that I'm sitting here, I can't do it. This guy's killing online, taking pictures. They feel intimidated. They feel upset, So I always say that just disconnect, use social media as a tool to grow yourself. And don't take these things too personally. But I do think that everyone at this point in time, you should have some form of social media presence, because that's how you get discovered. You said sponsorships. I hope that one day, I know Canon's talking to me, Nat Geo, putting your portfolio out there, putting yourself out there. You never know who's going to connect with you. Mm-hmm. And my last point I will say before I stop, I know I babble on way too much. I know people who are also starting their journeys. And there's one friend that I always talk to. I'm like, hey, have you started posting yet? And he's like, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, bro, the worst thing you can ever do is meet someone out in the city or out whatever, and there's someone of a high, there's someone who's doing it, they're killing it, they're owner of a business organization, and they say, oh, you do photography, show me your work, and your response is, oh, I'm thinking about it, or I'm not there yet, and they'll see that and wait a minute, you're thinking about it. What do you mean you're thinking about it? Oh, never mind, you're not serious about this. I'll ask Mike down the street. Mike has his stuff. Mike has his portfolio. Mike has his pictures. Mike's grinding. He's not wasting time. So my message to people is that, use this time to really put yourself out there. Don't care about your likes or views. If you have something you're passionate about, please post it. Please put yourself out there, because you never know who you're going to meet out in the world. And when that time comes, you don't want to miss that opportunity. And that's why social media is so important.
Yeah, I love that. And especially the negative comment thing is so true. Like, somebody does like the science, somebody who does science communication, like that's my thing. Like I do a lot of like debunking, or like, let's talk about that or whatever. You can go on like my pages, and I'm always sharing like just insights or thoughts. That's like my whole thing. It's like really like being a very heady about stuff. But like, and ask Chelsea, she knows. But so one person will be like, he'll be like, so I remember one time, I still remember it. It just tells you, one person was like, dude, it's like this guy's like a master of like yapping. And I was like, why does that hurt so much? And I was like, he's just like, nah, he's like, nah. He said, because he really just yapped for like 5 minutes. And I was like, why does that bother me so much? I was like, it was just so weird. So many people in the comments, they literally said, not you fluent in Japanese. I was like, literally, like they were though. They're like, nah, because if I really wanted to hear a yap session, like I would have like asked for that. And I was just like, that's crazy. It's like, I was like, I bet it really does stick with you. But most people I feel like have been very supportive, which is important. But Chelsea, I wonder if you have thoughts. I think you're cutting a little bit, but you're back now.
It's okay, I'm back. For me, I'm like really excited to see that more people are getting online and getting interested in different things, especially like things that they might not normally like have access to. But then that also comes with like the side of like, people are like, oh, well, I Googled this and I feel like that makes me an expert in it. And it's good to Google things and get like answers to your questions. But like sometimes there are people who have dedicated years of their life into figuring out exactly the thing you're looking up, and they're telling you like, hey, this is like a misconception, this is incorrect. And you're like, one person has more followers, so they must be right. What do you mean by that? What do you mean? Like, not everybody goes to college, but that doesn't that doesn't mean you like don't know something. You could have still done a lot of research on it, you read a lot of papers.
I think she cut.
Oh no.
She'll probably pop back in for a moment.
I'm back.
Oh yes, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah, and like again, like the negative comments. I try not to think about them. I have like these specific filters on my Twitter, so I don't get notifications at all for certain types of replies. I get notifications from people that like I follow that reply to me. If people quote tweet me, I do want to see that, because sometimes I'll like talk about an animal and they'll be like, well, actually, and like in that case, I want to know. But like the people comfortable like commenting on my body or like sending me messages about my body is really, really weird. And I have like a filter within a filter in my DMs, which like if you're female presenting a woman on the internet, please look into all of these things, because you need that. Yep. I also I pay for a service that will like automatically like block people that send me things like that if I like they hit a special keyword in there. And it can be great and it can be terrible, and you have to learn to take the good with the bad of being online. But like Anwar was saying, like you need to put yourself out there, put everything that you're doing out there. I'm working on my website, so I don't have like my portfolio on a website, but I have a Google Drive with all of my art. So if you ever ask to see my art, I'm like, here's this folder. They're all in here. There's somewhere that I can share it with people. And like, you know, finding ways to be able to like share your work and tell people about your work, even if you don't have the ideal setup yet. Like ideally I have a website and there's a little page for it. I don't have that. I have the Google Drive folder, and they'll accept it. They will accept the Google Drive folder because they still get to see your work. They still get to see what you're doing. Any way that you can share what you're working on, if this is what you're passionate about and you want to do it, like do your best to work on things. Like similar to what Tyus said, like there is a comment that like sticks with me, and it's literally I was talking about one of the endemic parrots on my island, and this like a white man from England was like, "You are spelling that wrong." And I was like, "I'm spelling the Creole that I grew up speaking wrong. I'm sorry." What do you mean by that? What do you mean? And he was just so insistent on it, like every day, like every now and then I like remember it. It pops up back in my head and it's like, he really thought that I was wrong. I wonder where that came from.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, we have a lot. I'm sure there's all sorts of crazy stories that we could tell. I feel like we should probably come to a close, and just wanted to again say thanks so much to everybody, and also just say thank you to Joe, who has also helped like host and or making sure things also stay on track.
Thank you, Joe.
And I just figured I'd just let you guys get final closing statements. And I feel like the last question that I'd ask you is just like, what is the like legacy, you know, as a conservationist, as a scientist, as a scholar, as a creative mind, like what legacy do you hope to leave behind? And how do you want your work to impact not just the community around you, including the science community, but society as a whole?
Yeah, I also am very fluent in Japanese, so I'm not going to talk too much. But one thing that I want to leave behind is just overall my work and just inspiring people to just get out there in the field. Nothing too crazy. It's just something as people. The number one question is, how do I become a wildlife photographer? And it's such a simple answer. I always say, like, there's nature right outside your house, no matter where you go. You don't have to travel the world. Like, if you look right outside, there's animals right out there. You know, I started off on my phone, you know, and I worked my way up to getting more and more and more advanced gear. So I always say that, you know, I want people to really, if they're passionate about something, please put yourself out there. Please don't waste time. It's really important that you really follow your dreams. And don't let people try to downplay and say you can't do something. If I always look back and I always think of like, man, what if I took that principal's advice? What if I dropped everything and became a basketball player? And I hate basketball. So what if I, you know, took that person's advice and not followed my dream? Where would my life be right now? And I always think about, man, what if I always think that I wish I could visit this principal and be like, hey, how's it going? Like, you remember me from, you know, many years ago? You said I couldn't do this thing, and I'm doing it, and I'm doing it pretty well, you know. So follow your dreams, follow your passion, start now. And yeah, don't let anyone take your dream away from you.
I love that. Thank you, Anwar. I appreciate those thoughts. Chelsea, close us off.
Yeah, no, I definitely recommend doing whatever it is that you are thinking about. If you're thinking about writing, you're thinking about drawing, you're thinking about designing things, you need to start somewhere. Like, don't just think about it, do it. The amount of times that I've been like, oh, I should do this and I should do that, and then I end up doing nothing, and opportunities and moments pass me by. Like, if it's gonna make you happy, you should definitely go for it. Definitely try it out. Don't think about whether or not you'll fail, because the point is not whether or not you'll fail or be successful. The point is that you did the thing that you were excited to do. And that's something that like I hold with me a lot. That I wanted it to. I'm gonna do better next time because I have that practice in doing it. the point is doing it. The point is, being happy creating the thing that you're creating.
I love it. I will close this off with just once again saying thank you so much to everybody that tuned in, to Chelsea Connor, to Anwar Abdul-Qawi, and also Joe, who has helped keep things on track as well. And also thank you for tuning in and listening to all the guests today. I hope you have a wonderful event. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We still have more events for the rest of the week. Tune in and check out blackmammologist.com for everything that's going on. And as always, stay curious.